Christmas is a season for spending time with friends and family, renewing old traditions and creating new ones. And one of our traditions here is to release our single malt Scotch whiskey Christmas gift list. Well, Merry Christmas, guys. It's time for our third annual list where we're going to talk about almost 40 different whiskeys that you can give the whiskey lover in your life. My name is Matt. This is Whiskey on the West Coast. Let's talk about best value, or the best low-cost bottling for your dollar. Now, I've talked a lot about value bottlings in the past because I think they're important because they keep whiskey accessible, both for new and experienced drinkers. And four whiskeys that I've mentioned in the past that are all between $50 to $75 and are really great drinkers are the Benromach 10-year-old. I love that whiskey. The Craigellachie 13. You guys have heard me talk about these a ton. Same with the Glengyle 12-year-old. These are all great options. And finally, the much-loved Arran 10-year-old. I wanted to talk to you about a whiskey that I actually discovered more recently. So it's actually a more recent option, and it's one that really surprised me, and that is going to be this Loch Lomond Steam and Fire Edition. It is a non-age statement whiskey. It's bottled at 46% ABV. It's a Highland single malt Scotch whiskey. It actually is non-chill filtered natural color, and it's bottled at 46%. Only $42 is what I paid for it. You can commonly find it in Canada, at least Alberta, for $40 to $50. This was an eye-opening whiskey for me. When I finally got around to popping the cork, I poured not one but two glasses of this, and I rarely do that. And why? Because it was so bright and fruity and satisfying. It was a really lovely drop and was completely unexpected for the price. However, while it's a non-age statement whiskey, about 95% of this whiskey is unpeated spirit that's between 7 to 10 years old, with the other 5% being 5-year-old spirit that's been heavily peated up to 50 phenol parts per million. Now, what they've done is they've aged these in a few different casks. However, they then finished it in heavily charred American oak barrels. Really, honestly, it's a great little fruit bomb with a touch of spice for a ridiculously good price. Even though older isn't always necessarily better when it comes to whiskey, sometimes it's just fun to drink something that's been slumbering in oak casks for nearly a quarter century and reflect on where all the time has gone. And so I'm going to suggest that a great whiskey this holiday season would be the Cadenhead's 25-year-old Enigma blended Scotch whiskey. Now, this bottle is a quarter-century-old mystery. No one, not even Cadenhead's, the independent bottler who bottled and released this whiskey, knows what whiskeys are actually in this bottle. What we do know, though, is that it's at least 25 years old. It's bottled at 41.4% ABV, non-chill filtered, natural color, and fully matured and refill sherry butts. We also know that at least some of those 25 years where it has been aging were spent in the warehouses at Cadenhead's in Campbelltown. This Enigma is a pleasant, sherried blended Scotch to have in your glass, and hopefully cast your thoughts back to 1999, 25 years ago when we were all preparing for Y2K. Oh, and I didn't mention, in Alberta, Canada, where I got this bottle from, it regularly retails for about $140 Canadian, but I actually picked this bottle up on sale for $105 Canadian, which means you can get it as low as $4.20 a year, which is a fantastic deal. What do you get the person who seemingly has everything in whiskey? Perhaps something new. We're going to talk about some new kids on the block. Since 2014, there's been over 37 distilleries that have opened in Scotland, and these single malt Scotch whiskey distilleries are making some fantastic whiskey. A few I really want to talk about. One is going to be Torabhaig, the newest distillery on the Isle of Skye, which is making some beautiful, sweet, young coastal peated whiskeys. They have three main releases so far: the Altglean batch strength, and the Ardnamurchan. Now, the Altgleans are ex-bourbon cask influenced, and the Ardnamurchan is both bourbon, Oloroso, and Pedro Jimenez influenced. The one I really want to highlight, and I have on my table here today, is going to be the Torabhaig Altglean batch strength. This is a really, really cool whiskey. It is 61.1% ABV. It's non-chill filtered. It's natural color. It has a 77 ppm of phenols count, so that's how heavily smoked the grain is. However, they actually tell us the residual phenols in the bottle, which are 22.8, which actually is a really interesting detail to tell us. And I kind of nerd out and geek out on it, and I think other whiskey lovers will too. It runs about $100 to $125 Canadian, and it's just, again, fantastic stuff. Honestly, Talisker better watch out because its neighbor is doing things the right way. The other distillery I really want to spend some time on here is the Ardnamurchan distillery on the Ardnamurchan Peninsula. It's probably the most well-known of this next generation of whiskeys. It's a 3-time winner of the Best New Distillery Award with the Oswas and is the reigning Best Distillery winner for 2024. Something to be really proud of. Where to start? Where do you start with Ardnamurchan? I'm going to suggest that you start with the Ardnamurchan AD release. It's going to look something like this. This is some old branding here. However, it's their core range whiskey. It's a 50-50 split between peated and unpeated spirit, and it's a combination of both ex-bourbon and sherry casks, bottled at 46.8%, non-chill filtered, natural color, all that good stuff. And you can pick this up in my market for somewhere between $60 to $80 Canadian. I think it's a fantastic whiskey. You can see my bottle's really low here. However, Ardnamurchan did just release their first ever 10-year-old single malt. And if you have access to that, that's a fantastic bottle and a great option to pick up for a Christmas gift. But that hasn't arrived in Canada yet. What we do have in Canada, if you're familiar with Kensington Wine Market or can shop in Calgary or Alberta, you can pick up this brand new single cask whiskey from Ardnamurchan. It's a fantastic heavily peated Ardnamurchan from an ex-bourbon cask. I believe it's 7 years old. I cracked this one recently and it's absolutely lovely. It's right up a peat lover's alley. And again, around $125. If those don't quite turn your crank, there's a few other options here that I'd suggest, like the Isle of Harris has the Hirak. It's a beautiful, lovely, lightly peated, coastal influenced whiskey, and it comes in this really snazzy bottle designed by Stranger & Stranger. Really beautiful presentation on that, and that does matter when you're giving a Christmas gift. As well as the newest distillery from the Isle of Islay, that would be Ardnahoe, and their inaugural 5-year-old single malt, which again, it's just a lovely, lovely whiskey. I think there's a lot to be excited for with them, and that would be a great gift as well. Sometimes it's just good to keep your taste buds guessing and switch it up a bit. It can't always be about Scotch, right? Well, that's exactly what we're going to talk about here. There's some whiskeys I've been particularly enjoying from around the world, so we're going to tour the world. And the first stop on our tour of the world is going to be the United States of America, where we're going to talk about High West, a Midwinter Night's Dram, which honestly sounds like Christmas in a bottle. This is a straight rye whiskey that's been finished in port barrels and bottled at 49.3% ABV. High West recently increased their production of this whiskey. It's becoming easier to get, and you can find it in Canada for somewhere between $140 $170 Canadian. Really lovely whiskey. Let's talk about Japan now. Zip over to the island of Japan and the island of Hokkaido. We're going to talk about my favorite Japanese single malt distillery, and that is the Yoichi Distillery. I love this whiskey. I've talked about it plenty. This non-age statement release is bottled at 45% ABV. It's lightly peated. It has a really interesting and beautiful profile, really unique because of their direct-fired, coal-fired stills. I love this whiskey, about $70 to $100 Canadian. If you have it already, think about upgrading to the 10-year-old. Much harder to get, limited quantities, and really it's a lot more expensive at about $200 Canadian, but I have had it. I really liked it. Obviously, I liked it enough to get a bottle and have it on my shelf here. Finally, let's zip back around to the Great White North to Canada and talk about the Two Brewers release number 44 single malt Canadian whiskey. This one right here hails again from the Two Brewers Distillery. Two Brewers is actually the closest distillery in Canada, at least, to the North Pole, which feels very Christmassy. They hail from Whitehorse in the Yukon. This is the follow-up to their Canadian Whiskey Award winning release number 41, which won Best Single Malt in 2023 at that awards. Now, the whiskeys that went into release number 44 are some of the oldest in the distillery's stocks and were finished in some Pedro Jimenez sherry casks. This whiskey runs about $100 to $110 Canadian. It's a beautiful option. The next category is a special release that is perfect for Christmas. And the one I'm nominating here is from the Bunnahabhain Distillery on Islay, and that would be the Bunnahabhain Fegial 2024 Ruby Port Cask 14-year-old Islay Single Malt Whiskey. Now, this is a 14-year-old single malt, again, from the northern tip of Islay. This was distilled in 2009. It's bottled at 58.7% ABV, non-chill filtered, natural color. This was matured in bourbon casks until they were transferred to ruby port casks in 2020. So almost 4 years of a ruby port cask finish. It's $130 to $230 Canadian. It really varies on where in Canada you are for this price, or where in the world honestly you are for this bottle. But it's bottled for Craigellachie of 2024, and this special edition feels like it was made to drink in the winter and around Christmas. We have the tradition in our house anyways of opening a bottle of port for the holidays, for Christmas, to to share and sip. And this whiskey has those deep currant, red fruit, chocolate, and spice notes that I associate with the season and with port wine. Honestly, it's a delicious whiskey, and it's one in my glass as I'm shooting this video. The whiskey industry is experiencing a bit of a downturn currently, with stories of distilleries closing becoming just all too common. It's more important than ever to show the local distilleries we do appreciate some love. And so some local distilleries that I like to support are, number one, I'm going to talk about Shelter Point, located on Campbell River in Vancouver Island. Their 10-year-old single malt whiskey is a really lovely expression. It retails for about $115 Canadian, and it probably would be my favorite Shelter Point if not for the fact of how amazingly good the 12-year-old is. I intend to review this because it is absolutely 100% my favorite Shelter Point single malt release ever. It beats out any single cask I've had. It's a beautiful whiskey. Also retails for about $115 Canadian. There still is a couple bottles kicking around. Tough to find though, really both of them are. However, while these two releases take a lot of the spotlight, I do think that the classic single malt, which will be represented by the artisanal single malt here on this coaster, which retails for about $80, is the best it has ever been, and carries a 7-year age statement now, which is also pretty cool. All are 46% ABV, non-chill filtered, natural color. I also want to talk about another Vancouver Island distillery, Macaloney's Island Distillery, located in Saanich near Victoria. The Ann Abba single malt from Macaloney's is by far right now my favorite thing that they are putting out. It is a lightly peated single malt whiskey using Washington State peat from the nearby Olympic Peninsula. It's really delicious stuff, and it is exactly the type of whiskey I want to dram. I love these lightly peated whiskeys. Next up, a sherry bomb for Christmas. Feels appropriate. There's the Bunnahabhain, which is another single malt, but it's a sherry bomb of a single malt. It's using 90% Oloroso sherry cask, 10% Pedro Jimenez sherry cask. It's really Moorish and really delicious thing to sip on a cold winter's night. Finally is the Kilkerran, represented by this here. The Kilkerran is a Canadian triple distilled pot still whiskey, which actually won World's Best Pot Still Whiskey at the Canadian Whiskey Awards in 2023, a really big achievement. All these bottles are bottled 46% ABV, non-chill filtered, natural color, and these ones all run about $105 to $115 Canadian. Let's talk about some sherried single malts. Last year, I suggested a great sherry cask influenced whiskey to pick up would be the Arran Bodega Sherry Cask, nearly cask strength bottling, really lovely stuff. I've enjoyed it quite a lot, but I already told you guys about that one last year, as I did the more expensive Tamdhu 18-year-old. The Bodega is about $70 Canadian. The Tamdhu 18 is about $250 Canadian. Again, both really great options. However, sometimes you just got to keep it simple. You got to go back to an old favorite and a classic at this point. In my opinion, that's going to be the GlenAllachie 12-year-old Speyside single malt Scotch whiskey, 46% ABV, non-chill filtered, natural color. Combination of Pedro Jimenez, Oloroso, and virgin oak casks. Runs about $80 to $100 Canadian. Used to be a little cheaper, but like spice, coffee, dark fruits, Christmas cake, dark chocolate. Really lovely dram. This is the old bottling here. That's the old labeling. It is actually going to look more like this one here now, which I think is an improvement. As you can see, I like this whiskey enough to have picked up a bottle of the new design as well. I want to back this one up. I do really enjoy it. That said, if you want to spend a little bit more money and, you know, treat yourself, I would suggest that you go ahead and you pick up the Bunnahabhain 18-year-old. This is an old bottle of the 18-year-old single malt Scotch whiskey from the island Islay. We talked about Bunnahabhain earlier. This is 46.3% ABV, non-chill filtered, natural color. Runs anywhere between like $190 to $230 Canadian. This was Sheldon from Noteworthy Whiskey on Instagram. This was his whiskey of the year in 2023, which is huge praise. He tries a lot of whiskeys. He's a great whiskey reviewer. He knows his stuff. And I have really enjoyed my bottle, the 18-year-old. That feels quintessential Christmas in a bottle for sure. Simply one of the best 18-year-old sherried whiskeys out there. However, the Bunnahabhain 12-year-old cask strength is no slouch either. And while that's hard to get in Canada here, other markets do have that. I would also highly recommend that one. Let's talk about some peated whiskeys for the peat lovers out there. And one of the inexpensive options that I have replaced possibly more than any other bottle on my shelf is actually the Ledaig 10-year-old single malt Scotch whiskey from the Torabhaig Distillery on the Isle of Mull. It is one of the first whiskeys I reviewed on the channel as well. I love this whiskey. It's a fantastic option. 46.3% ABV, non-chill filtered, natural color, about 35 ppm for the phenol count, and $60 to $75 Canadian. This is close to the same price as a Ledaig Sinclair Series Rioja cask, at least in Canadian dollars for what I can pick up the 10 for. I can't actually even purchase the Sinclair Series in Canada, so I automatically go to the 10-year-old, but I have had both, and I would recommend the 10-year-old over the Sinclair Series if they're around the same price. Mid-range, I want to talk about what's probably the best and most consistently good 10-year-old single malt Scotch whiskey from the Isle of Islay right now, which is going to be the Port Charlotte 10-year-old single malt from the Bruichladdich Distillery. It's 50% ABV. It's non-chill filtered. It's no color added. Is probably the most consistent whiskey coming out of Islay right now that has a 10-year age statement. It's beautiful stuff. It's $100 Canadian, give or take $10. It is a fantastic whiskey, and if you haven't had it, it's a must try. Finally, if you want to splurge a little bit and actually pick up something that's just a bit more expensive, a special release that I have really enjoyed this year is going to be this year's Laphroaig Carchis. It is the Laphroaig Carchis 2024 10-year-old cask favorites. I think it might be one of the best Laphroaig Carchis releases in the last number of years. It's a fantastic whiskey using quarter casks, PX and ex bourbon casks. It's aged at least 10 years old, which is the first Carchis I remember with an age statement for a number of years. It's released to thank the Friends of Laphroaig and celebrate Craigellachie each year, and it retails anywhere between $130 to $150 Canadian. And I would probably go back and buy a backup of this one. Like, I'm really loving this one, guys. I can't recommend it enough. Honorable mention to a heavily peated whiskey that's not from Islay. It's not even from an island, and that would be the Macaloney, the Turbo, which I reviewed. I really loved it. It was my favorite of the Macaloney's, and it's something that disappears so quickly off the shelves in Canada that it's a lottery and ballot bottle now. So it's an honorable mention for that reason, but it's roughly $110 Canadian. 71 ppm is the phenol level on the whiskey. 5 years old, American Virgin Oak and Oloroso cask, bottle at 50% ABV. It's a stonking whiskey at 5 years old. If you love peat, I'm gonna suggest you're probably gonna love the Turbo. If you watched the Christmas list before, you know that I've talked about the Christmas hero category, where Arnold Schwarzenegger saves the day by getting the Turbo Man doll for his kid and Jingle All the Way. That's essentially what we're going to talk about here. A whiskey that if you find, you are saving Christmas. All right. First year, I talked about Springbank. If you were able to find something Springbank, you were a bona fide Christmas hero. Last year, I talked about Daftmill. If you found Daftmill for your loved one, for the person you were buying whiskey for, 100% Christmas hero. That was you. This year, I'm going to talk about something that's a bit easier to find, but was really impressive whiskey last year, and I'm very hopeful that the 2024 version is even better. And I'm going to be talking about the Kilkerran 16-year-old from the Glengyle Distillery in Campbelltown. Now, this is a bit more achievable than some of the other Christmas years in the past. However, the 2023 edition was one of my favorite whiskeys last year. The 2024 edition is bottled at 46% ABV non-chill filtered natural color. It's 70% ex-bourbon, 20% ex-sherry, 10% ex-rum casks. It should run around anywhere between $125 to $150 Canadian. It's not easy to find, but if you do, maybe, just maybe, Christmas will be saved. All right, we've made it to the final category, guys, the best overall whiskey. It's the intersection of all things I consider that make a great Christmas whiskey. And before I tell you about that, I want to thank you for watching this far into the video. Thank you for all you who leave comments, who like, who subscribe, who have supported me in many various different ways, whether it be Patreon, jumping on the live streams, or just saying hi. Thank you so much. I want to wish all of you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. And thank you so much for joining me on the channel this year. I really appreciate it. The best overall Christmas whiskey, which is the intersection of all things Christmas. Sherry cask influenced? Yeah, check. Peated, albeit moderately? Check. High strength, or what I'm gonna call holiday strength? Yeah, check. Springbank-ish? Well, it is the Springbank of Speyside, so check. And finally, good price? Yes, that's a check. We're gonna be talking about a whiskey that was my favorite cask strength whiskey, only behind the Springbank 12 cask strength last year, and that is the Benromach cask strength 2013 batch 1 Speyside single malt Scotch whiskey from the Benromach Distillery in Force. Honestly, this whiskey is a gorgeous one, and it is one of the best values out there in Scotch whiskey. You may have seen Ralphie recently review it. I talked about this last year in my year-end videos. It's about $105 Canadian if you don't pick it up on sale. I picked it up on sale for $85 Canadian, which is an incredible deal. 59.7% ABV, non-chill filtered natural color. First fill casks only, so first fill ex-bourbon, first fill sherry casks. 9 years old, almost 10. It's rugged, it's characterful, it's fruity single malt with an industrial, almost like farmy funk edge to it. I adore Benromach, and this whiskey is no exception. I know some of you don't necessarily enjoy the Benromach character, and if you know that you don't enjoy it, there were 37 other whiskeys on this list I hope you do enjoy, but this drinks way too easily for a whiskey that's essentially 60% ABV. I think this is the perfect whiskey for Christmas. It's a thing of beauty, and I hope this is something that you can pick up in your market. Thank you so much for joining me here, guys, on Whiskey on the West Coast. I hope Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, and for New Year's, you have something beautiful in your glass, that you're keeping great company, and that you come back for more from the West Coast in the future. From the West Coast, my name is Matt. Slange.